The good news is for me today, I get to just introduce our speakers and then go on mute and eat a sandwich. So it's going to be great to be me today, I think. Thanks for doing that, Elisa and Desiree. A couple thoughts as we help frame the presentation. One of the things we've been thinking about is how do we add value for the ACC in general, but in particular as we dive deeper into the new to in-house folks and try to give them a nugget or two that's a win and a takeaway they could use to supplement their practice. And we thought of this, our digital crisis planning and response product in our practice and our professionals in this space, because it's a little, if you're anything like me, it's a little, it is unusual to say that for a lawyer to be thinking in terms of PR and marketing risk and digital crisis, what that means. And oftentimes it's so easy for us to say, marketing's got that, or that's a PR issue and it's not mine. But I think that's a false narrative. And frankly, it took until I helped manage a client working with our team here through their own crisis. And one time it was a Wall Street bets run up on the stock and figuring out what not to say was crucial. Another, it's a social media issue and figuring out how to say what to say is crucial. And all that has legal risk, and everything you say can and will be used against you. So if you're not part of that solution, I think you're going to be at a disadvantage. So it's a good way for our seasoned lawyers to understand some of these issues, but really for the new folks who are going in-house to kind of dust off the cobwebs and pick up a new area and learn more and go deeper. So with that framing, I'm pleased to introduce to you all two of my good partners and friends, Desiree Moore, who sits in our Chicago office, and pre-pandemic, much more in Doha. I don't think that's been happening lately, but so mostly relegated to Chicago. And she's a litigator by trade, but really got a great social media. She founded our social media practice, understands deeply communications and some of the legal tools to help manage social media issues and the communications that fall along with it. And Elisa, the Amic, who sits in Miami, who says she's got a nudge towards Dallas, but I'm really trying to encourage her to be more present and keep space in our Dallas office. So hopefully she won't be a stranger very often. And Elisa's got also a litigator with great experience, but has a particular knack for forensics, and as good as a computer forensics nerd as you'll find. So hopefully for all those nerds out there, you're in good company with this panel. I think you'll find yourself at home. So with that, Desiree, Elisa, hopefully I didn't botch the intros, but thank you for doing it, and I'm happy to be a listener today.
Thanks to all of you for being here with us. I'll give sort of a quick overview of where we're going today, but I think what Artush said is critical, and so we'll reinforce it. The idea behind this presentation in particular is to give you some tools and also some new ways to think about how you can come to the table creatively with legal solutions that some of your older colleagues might not be focused on. We have sort of a distinct advantage in this space for those of us who are adept at social media platforms, who are consuming news the way that we consume news now in kind of a 24-hour social platform cycle. So we'll give you some takeaways throughout that I think will really kind of change the way that you think about some of the legal issues that come before you. So our program today is going to center on digital crisis planning and response. We'll give you an overview of what that is, and as we call it, DCPR. So we'll orient you to DCPR. And then we'll talk about some of the key crises that we deal with under the DCPR rubric. And then we'll give you some takeaways, some tangible things that you can take away and implement in your practice starting today.
Desiree and I have been working together for a number of years, and it doesn't hurt that we're also good friends. But we started to notice time and time again that our clients were coming to us for nuanced help, right? That was certainly it was legal help, but there were different aspects that weren't exactly all sort of the straight legal that you would think that comes out of a corporate law firm. So as we were collaborating more and more, we realized that there were enough clients that needed this sort of thing, and of course, those that didn't even know that they need this. And we decided to come up with what we call DCPR. And what we do essentially is provide legal services plus to our clients. So we incorporate communications, PR, forensics, all that work. And what it boils down to is, as Desiree said, nowadays life takes place both online and offline. And even where you choose or a company chooses not to have an online presence, you don't really have control of that choice, right? That's not really yours, because other people can talk about you. There can be online chatter, and unless you're listening to it and keeping your ear to the ground, you won't know about it. And so our practice tries to look both proactively and reactively at online crises, and of course offline as well. But we try to counsel clients on, of course, being proactive, but then of course when something hits the fan, we're there to try to help. And our thought is, if we can be there and our clients know that we're there, then they can get back to work, right? The last thing you want is to have to worry about something on top of your day job. And so we always say, let us worry about it, and let the client get to work. So that's a little bit about what we do, sort of on a day-to-day. But I think as we go on, you'll understand some of the nuances about what we're dealing with.
So we are going to take you through some key crises. And as Elisa said, we styled this as digital crisis planning and response, because in our view and our experience, there are no crises that don't have, that was a double negative. All crises have a digital component, right? Even if it's a brick and mortar crisis of some sort, it's a financial crisis, or God forbid, an active assailant. We learn about those crises online. People are talking about those crises online. And so the type of crisis management that we do is traditional in a sense, but we have seen a shift over the years onto digital platforms, and crises occurring on digital platforms, or being talked about on digital platforms. And so that's the reasoning behind the styling of digital crisis planning and response. Emphasis on planning, because we're always happy to step in with our clients and plan for a crisis, ensure that clients have a crisis management plan and know what they're going to do, tabletop exercises that help them understand what they need to do, what the priority action items are in the face of a crisis. And in the event that we haven't had the opportunity to plan, we step in with a swift response in the face of all manner of crises. Here, we're going to take you through some of the key crises that we see again and again. And we do find that there's some pattern to the types of crises that we deal with. These aren't, it's not an exclusive list, but this will give you some color for, and I think you'll probably connect with a lot of these. You've seen these types of crises throughout your practice. So we'll jump right into those now.
Thanks, Desiree. And so again, what we're trying to do is talk to you and let you know what we're seeing a lot of, and then also give you an idea of sort of how we deal with it, right? With, of course, being very vague and not giving away any client details, but some of the sort of exemplars as we've seen them come through. So a really big problem these days is imposter social media accounts. Now, I imagine many of you are sitting there and either have had this happen to them or know of a friend, right? All of a sudden, your best friend is sending you a Facebook request, and you're thinking, that's strange because we've been friends for like 10 years, right? I was like the first one on Facebook after Zuck. But this is also happening on the corporate level and also high profile individuals. And we're seeing this quite a bit. For many people, I think the immediate sort of phraseology is I've been hacked, right? My account has been hacked. I like to refer to it as unauthorized access, because I don't think it always rises to the level of hacking. Example, some people leave their social media accounts logged in on a public computer, and then someone's able to gain access, or save the password, right? That sort of a thing on your phone. But at the corporate level, what we're seeing is that C-suite employees, so a CEO or president, or a big name, a well-known name, so a public figure, they are having their online personas copied, duplicated, and then there's a secondary profile that they're not in control of, they didn't give us the authority for, and that imposter profile can do or try to do a number of things. So for one of the situations we dealt with was an investment firm, and their main and most well-known level in management, right, had made the decision, I've mentioned this before, to not have an online presence, right? No social media accounts, personal or otherwise professional. And someone decided to put him online and copy his photograph and his bio and his name, and then started to give out investment advice. Now, he wasn't giving investment advice on social media, but by this profile, a lot of clients, customers, colleagues thought that he was actually doing it. And what happens on social media is that obviously things get a lot of traction, especially when someone's well known. And of course, that all goes back to the company if the company fails to take action. So, that's one idea of what happened. And of course, we worked, I believe that was one of our all-nighters, but worked around the clock to try to get that down because it was having a serious financial impact on, on the company side. Another scenario that we've seen.
Can I just jump in on that one for a second? Just to make one comment about that. I love that example because it demonstrates sort of the confluence of things that you should be thinking about when you see, a digital crisis like this. For an investment advisor, they're in a highly regulated financial industry, and so the implications are significant. As soon as someone purporting to be one of the sort of high profile advisors in the firm is publicly issuing financial advice, I think in this case, advice as to what companies to invest in, or I think maybe more specifically was advising to, bet against the market, that can have significant implications and can quickly turn into regulatory scrutiny for the company, if we're not watching socials closely, if we're not aware of this and taking it down. So that working sort of overnight, there's a real kind of implication there if we aren't working quickly and aren't having these accounts removed. So I just wanted to follow up on your helpful example.
Thanks. No, I'm actually really glad that you did because I neglected to point that out. Depending on what is at issue, right? There's no cookie cutter answer to how we will handle something. But when we're talking about a highly regulated industry, one of the paths of escalation is certainly to report to the regulators. And that is very much a decision that is made, I think certainly legal, but in connection with, PR and marketing or communication to make sure that the messaging is all the same. So thanks for pointing out that regulatory piece. Yes, publicly traded companies, certainly we have our own way to treat them. And actually, that's another point is, depending on the type of company or industry, the online chatter tends to take place in different places. So depending on what client we're dealing with, we look in different places, right? Whether it's a forum or Twitter or maybe there's some other platform where most of that chatter is coming through. Another example, because the people that do this, right, that those sort of bad actors that are engaging this, they have different motives. Sometimes it's really hard to understand why. I really think, and I know that some people just do it because they can. But in some cases, it is meant to pull customers away, to steal business, and so an imposter profile is often molded with some sort of other social engineering. So, for example, one of our clients out of Asia, the CEO of the company realized, and actually it was online for almost a year before they realized it. And his LinkedIn profile had been essentially duplicated. And on that profile, the bad actors that set up a link for clients and customers and those who wanted to communicate with him, and he was very well known, to submit through that form. And of course, that wasn't a valid link. It didn't go back to the company. It went to the scammers who were then utilizing that information for other bad acts. So again, if you see an imposter social media account, it's certainly something to keep your eyes on. The next is, and this is, I'll just start out, and Desiree, I'll pass this one to you, but employee misconduct. Let me start by saying that I think a lot of companies don't realize that employees really are a company's best defense weapon tool, right? When companies are in the know and are happy, then they're your biggest mouthpiece, right? You almost don't, certainly not going to say you don't need marketing, but that helps. When employees are left in the dark, that often can cause problems where if they're not getting information internally, they might reach out to the outside. But either way, no matter how good your communication plans are, we always see, and this is time and time again, that we see either current or former employees who are disgruntled for some reason or another. Sometimes they have a valid basis for it. Sometimes it's completely fabricated. There's a lot of behind the scenes, but we see them take to social media and the internet and blogs and YouTube and all of that time and time again. And so that is something that companies, I think, should be really mindful of, in terms of having a crisis plan, being ready to deal with that and making sure that it's folded into things like termination agreements and policies, and making sure that you're well equipped if this happens or when this happens to fight back. Des, maybe you can give some examples or more insight, because I know you've had a lot of these too.
Sure, and this is a critical one. We do, as Elisa said, see this again and again, that employees are at the heart of digital crises that companies are facing. It's oftentimes a former employee, but not always. And sometimes it's sort of an internal threat actor who's utilizing current information about the company to then either misappropriate trade secrets and post on an industry forum, or share, again, we talked about a public company, maybe sharing material information prematurely or in a manner that is not compliant with the pertinent and relevant regulations. So on the sort of new to in-house side, this is a space that you can watch closely and really, I think, have an impact in. And Elisa said something important, right? We talk a lot about transparency with our employees, allowing them to air grievances in a manner that is, obvious to them, that is functionally easy, because when they can't, they do then turn their grievances externally. We see employees oftentimes who raise some sort of issue internally, and they're not satisfied with the outcome. And that might be, if I had to categorize, that might be the number one sort of social media crisis we see. They've taken something to the company, they're not satisfied with the investigation or with the response that they received. And so they go ahead and share, either while they're still employed or post-termination, they'll share the details, the nature, they will often share internal details about the organization, maybe dynamics between people. They might accuse one or another in the company of having an affair, and that's why they were treated. This particular employee was treated unfairly. There's a lot of sort of, letting the sort of corporate dirt out. And sometimes it's true, and sometimes it's fabricated. And so there is a preemptive approach that you can take to try to lessen or minimize that damage. The other thing that we see often are employees who are terminated turn around and make physical threats to an organization, to their company. And so this demonstrates what we were saying earlier. We might see those threats via text messages, via WhatsApp, on social platform, messaging avenues. We may also learn of it and realize this could be a digital crisis, in the sense that if this person comes back onto the campus or goes back to the company and does something physically threatening, that's going to end up online in some fashion, in the media, on social media, and otherwise. So, really watching that space, being sensitive to the temperament of employees when you fire them. Oftentimes we have some signal an employee will be fired and will leave in an aggravated state, or will say something like, "This isn't the last time you've seen me," right? And then we sort of, Elisa and I will kick into gear. We will start watching socials. We're looking at that employee's profile, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and elsewhere, to understand if they're giving clues about what they might do, and generally watching the space for, any follow-up. So, that transparency, that emboldening of your employees, allowing them to talk is very important. And then also being sensitive to the fact that they will take to social platforms. And I'm going to jump ahead for a second. Elisa, I know we're going to talk about, some of the sort of legal nuances to takedowns in a minute. But what I will say is that the employee-related platforms like Indeed, or there are a handful of others that are escaping me, Elisa, you can jump in, but Indeed is a big one, where employees are encouraged to sort of rate their employers and talk about, their salary, their pay, their the conditions of their employment. it is very difficult to remove content from those sites. I mean, the sort of bread and butter of those sites is employee grievances, right? That's sort of what draws you to Glassdoor is another one. That was the one that wasn't coming to me, right? That's why people go to Glassdoor. They want to read all the dirt about a company. It's the reason they go to Indeed. They want to know if, you know, the bonus that somebody is promised in a job posting actually materializes. So, you know, I think Elisa and I are very adept at getting information down from platforms. We have our ways, but those platforms are really tricky because the kind of information that we would want to see come down is really what it's the lifeblood of those platforms. So once it's on socials, it's really quite late.
So let me just jump in for a minute on that and 2 points. I'm glad you raised that point about Glassdoor. There's actually one, Ratemyemployer.com. Something to think about is if your employee or former employee is taking to other platforms or other websites, a good place to start is trying to ascertain whether that sort of content is actually permitted on the sites, right? That these platforms and websites are not public spaces, right? They're very much private companies, and all of those companies have put in place terms and conditions, community guidelines, right? Many of you probably have these at the companies you're working for. And so that's a good place to start to try to see whether there's a likelihood that content will come down. The other thing to think about as well is we're talking about employees taking to social media, but one thing that I want to point out that's very important that we see over and over is employee misconduct that occurs on company IT. So you have someone who's either being harassed or harassing using a company phone, laptop, right, VPN. And so being thoughtful about what you're doing, working with IT to make sure if you know of something that information is being preserved, and understanding what's retained and not retained. So does the company, is the company policy to delete instant messages immediately? Maybe. And if you know that there's a potential issue, if there's a complaint, perhaps it makes sense to to preserve that for the time being. So just being thoughtful about that and understanding, some lawyers are very experienced with technology and some are Luddites, and that's okay. But understanding what it is that you have in terms of capabilities can be very helpful and can really truly make all the difference when it comes down to it. So I just wanted to say that piece of it.
I'm going to just make one other comment on the employee piece, because this is a trend that we're seeing that I think, depending on your industry, might be of a lot of value to you. Again and again, we see that employees will create social media profiles for purposes of their work. So for the purpose of, acting as a sales representative, for the purpose of, promoting something about the business online. And that's encouraged by the company, right? So that can work out just fine. But we strongly recommend that you look at your policies around that, sort of behavior and ensure that it's clear who owns those profiles when the employee leaves. Ensure that it's clear that the company owns the connections or friends or contacts on those profiles, because those are incredibly valuable. And in some instances, those are the trade secrets of the company, right? Your customer lists or your prospective clients. And so, having clarity around your systems for encouraging people to create social media profiles for corporate purposes is something to be thinking about. And, again, we said we'll give you some tips of things you can do right away. If that in any way plays into kind of your workplace, structures, I would encourage you to look at your policies and ensure that they do protect the company in the event that an employee leaves and fails to return or refuses to return the profiles. All right, on to one of my favorite topics, C-suite disgrace events. I do a lot of work in this space, celebrity disgrace events, C-suite disgrace events, owner disgrace events. Just as the name suggests, these are events where high-profile individuals are implicated in conduct or a scenario that is unflattering and that potentially jeopardizes their own well-being within the professional organization and the organization itself. The reason that these are part of our kind of digital crisis rubric is because, one, it's a quintessential kind of legal crisis. depending on the industry, you know, a public company is going to have shareholder considerations in the face of a C-suite disgrace event. If it's a healthcare organization and there's fraud, there are huge regulatory implications. And depending on the industry, this is a major ordeal. And because the news cycle picks up on these, we see just a 24-hour sort of sea of digital information about the event. And when our Artush talked at the outset about kind of how this practice blends legal implications with, you know, crisis communications, this is the perfect example of that, because we need to work closely with the organization to determine how we're going to talk about the event so that we are protective of the organization, transparent with employees, shareholders, board members, whomever may have an interest in the organization, and, you know, sharing information in real time so that if there's any erosion of trust, which oftentimes in kind of a, you know, high profile individual scenario, there is a huge erosion of trust, you know, we're thinking about repairing it. So, you know, it's sort of there's the digital kind of crisis aspect to it. There's the internal legal considerations, how we're going to deal with the legal fallout, and then, you know, how we talk about it. This has kind of come across our desks in many different ways over the last number of years. There was a lot of work around Black Lives Matter and the way that certain key people were talking about that and kind of what stance they were taking, and that resulted in a lot of movement in high profile organizations in terms of, you know, who was going to take the lead and who was going to keep their position, whether on the board or in the C-suite. And frankly, we've seen that carry over into sports and, you know, essentially anywhere that someone has a platform. They're a high profile athlete, if they're the owner of a sports team, if they are the, you know, head of a consumer driven organization, to the extent that they're not communicating correctly around social issues, that is an area where, you know, you are vulnerable for what we kind of phrase as a disgrace event. And so, you know, there is very little you can do preemptively other than training, right? So there are a lot of really good trainings around specifically the social movements, so that, you know, we might avoid kind of a misstep or a misspeak. And the threshold is very low. And we've seen this a lot with our clients where they will say, that's not what I intended, or that, you know, I didn't mean for it to go in this direction, but the tolerance threshold is really low. So some training can be very helpful on the social side, you know, social movement side. The other type of training that is helpful in avoiding sort of C-suite disgrace events, you know, surrounds workplace behavior, because a lot of the types of, you know, sort of events and issues that we see in this area have to do with workplace interactions that are then characterized as inappropriate or unlawful in some way. And this kind of ties in nicely to the employee misconduct or let's say employees speaking publicly category, right? That often leads to C-suite disgrace events. So some of these kind of tie together, but you know, a recent matter, which I sort of alluded to, but I'll make it a little bit more concrete. We supported the owner of a prominent sports team in their exit from ownership because of comments that were made on a radio station that were offensive to players, or that were perceived to be offensive to players and others surrounding Black Lives Matter. And you know, it's interesting to be in this space, because I will say that you learn without a doubt that there are two sides to every story, but that's not necessarily what carries the day in a digital crisis scenario. The more prominent, the louder a certain narrative is, the more likely that is what carries the day. And that's a big part of our jobs, is to say, okay, what are the legal implications? What are the facts? And now how are we going to talk about this in a manner that invokes the right feeling, the right tone, and the right level of transparency? And that's kind of the art of it, and a line that we toe daily.
That's right. I mean, between Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, and let's not forget the pandemic, we've seen a ton of action. Internet usage and social media usage has skyrocketed. And so bad behavior and bad actors and threat actors behavior has skyrocketed. we've all been cooped up for a while. People are running out of things to do. And, there's only so many, online courses or Zoom programs that you could take. In any event, it's certainly been busy. One thing that I'd like to talk about now is moving to IP, so copyright and trademark infringement. And this is something that's probably not very foreign to many of you, but it's also something that we're seeing a ton of. And sometimes it's such a nuanced part of a crisis scenario that we're seeing that clients don't pick up on using this avenue as a means to remove content. Let me sort of explain why and what that is. So for those of you who are aware of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, that's wonderful. It's certainly been in front and center in the media recently. If you don't know about it, it's really interesting to read about. As Artush mentioned, I am a complete internet geek and tech geek, so I've been actually litigating that for way too long. In any event, Section 230 essentially says that platforms and internet intermediaries are not responsible for third-party content, right? So user-generated content posted by a third party. Quintessential example is Facebook is not going to be responsible for defamatory content that one of their users posts on another person's profile. Now, there are exceptions to that rule. And one of, or two of those exceptions are for criminal conduct and then also for IP infringement. And so that means that if there is IP infringement, there's certainly a process to remove it, but if the platform doesn't comply, they lose their safe harbor. And so there could be very significant consequences. But what that also means is that, all of these platforms spend, and I keep saying platforms, but I also mean websites, spend an incredible amount of time and resources, and I'm sure many of you are thinking the same thing. Perhaps this is the type of company you work at, but on content moderation, right? Teams and teams of people, sometimes global, working to respond to and analyze requests to remove content that are put in. The copyright and trademark and other IP infringement requests are generally routed through a different channel than things like an imposter account or harassment or inappropriate comments, whatever that might be. These are routed differently, and that is because of the liability issue and what's at stake. So the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or the DMCA, provides a notice and takedown scheme to remove copyrighted material. The platforms, the social media platforms, generally have forms that are set up, so you can report through forms for imposter accounts and that type of thing, but there are specific forms for copyright and trademark, and they require certain information such as the trademark registration numbers or a link to the infringing content and also the content that is being infringed upon. So let's say it's your company logo or a photograph that one of your employees took or whatever that might be. And so that information, along with an affirmation that the content is accurate, right? So we are very careful about reviewing the submissions that we do. Some people, may or may not take that very seriously, but we take our ethical responsibilities absolutely very seriously and vet everything. But for example, if there's an imposter profile that is using your trademark or photographs or website or some sort of content, even written content in some way, there is an IP claim, or at least for removal, to be had. And that's a very good way to get expedited treatment from the platform. And we have ways of expediting internally, and we do that probably every day. I don't remember the last day that I haven't escalated something, but it happens. And so that's something very important to think about in terms of takedowns. The other thing is, I think it's worth saying, it's not only related to the social media platforms, although that's where a lot of people go, but we've had clients, for example, one client was a clothing business, right, that sold certain types of clothing online, had a website, and then realized that a competitor had popped up using the same exact photos, the same exact layout, down to the language that was used in like the hamburger bar and the drop downs. And so, that is not only copyright infringement, or we argued, but there's trade dress infringement, right? You can't copy someone's entire website so that there's confusion. And so there's ways to remove that sort of content. Each website that's live, including any of the blogging platforms, or the websites that seek information about your ex or gossip, those sorts of things, they all have an avenue for removals under the DMCA, under copyright. And those are important things to think about in addition to the terms of service of these websites, because often the intermediary bakes in that they have discretion to remove material. And so that's a way to be thoughtful about what content is up and what might be infringing. Are there any, Desiree, are there any copyright or trademark cases that you want to bring to light? I mean, I have a few, but.
Yeah, I'll just, I don't want to get too behind our time. So the only thing I'll say about that, I can quickly give an example that I think will help our audience think about how they might be able to add value. We had a matter where a food manufacturer of rice in particular was accused of creating plastic rice, so synthetic rice instead of real rice. And this woman kind of set out on Facebook to demonstrate that the rice was plastic, which makes no sense because plastic is more expensive than a grain. But in any event, that was the scheme that she was claiming that the company was doing. And she was pouring the rice into the pan and burning it and sort of saying, see, this demonstrates that it's plastic. And it went viral. I mean, hundreds of thousands of views. For whatever reason, this was very popular in a certain community. It took us a while to kind of figure out, like, what are we going to do about this? And we did sue this woman. It was causing a lot of harm to the company. But before that, like, what's the quick thing we can do? This is defamatory. It's false. The platforms aren't going to hear it. And then suddenly, sort of a light bulb moment. Wait, she has a bag of rice in view of this video that she made with, logo, name, sort of, all of the mark, the artwork in full display. That was our hook to get it down. So in terms of kind of new to in-house, what can you do if you're looking at a video like this and you're thinking, how can we get it down? What avenue might we have? If there's any level, as Elisa said, if there's any photo, I guarantee you it doesn't belong to the threat actor who's posting it. So go for that first. Try to figure out who owns the photograph. The owner of a photograph is the person who took the photograph. Can you find them? Do you know them? Can they give you a license? Can we figure out a way to kind of, make that copyright claim? So that's hopefully a helpful anecdote there.
I think so. Also worth noting that if you have employees who are photographing events or for work-related programs, make sure that the company retains copyright in that material. It'll make your job a lot easier, because the copyright assignment takes some time and you always want to be prepared ahead of time.
All right, so we wanted to mention this as sort of the final and kind of quintessential digital crisis. It is also the most common crisis that we're seeing in recent years. It's a little bit different from the types of things that we're talking about, and it's a program in and of itself. So we're not going to spend a lot of time, but this is something to be mindful of. You likely have a compliance officer, a director of IT, or a CISO. But if you can jump right on something like a cybersecurity incident or a data breach, the company will be better for it. I mean, you have to act quickly in the face of any type of cybersecurity incident. You want to engage forensics, and we'll talk about this in a moment, and the best way to do that, but engage forensics, figure out what has occurred, the extent of the breach, the nature of the breach, and whether the personally identifiable information of individuals was compromised. If it was, you're going to transition to a regulatory response, and that's all very well spelled out. Again, this is kind of my bread and butter, so I talk about it for hours, but just be mindful of the fact that this is a really sort of common crisis that we're seeing nowadays, and it is in some ways the perfect blend of a strong legal response and then a thoughtful communication plan, because you can't come out of the gate too early, for example, and tell your employees we've had a breach. that has significant repercussions on the class action side. If you designate that all your employees have had a breach, that's your class, irrespective of whether even one of those employees was harmed. And again, there are lots of reasons behind that, but the point is you want to really slow roll those communications. Equally, you might have to be transparent. If it's a ransomware event, you're going to have to tell people why they can't get into their email. So, you know, if it's widespread to that nature. So that's kind of data breach in 30 seconds. And I commit to coming back and doing a program.
I was just about to say that you definitely need to make this another program, and I'm totally going to cut you off now because otherwise
Yes,
it's go on
do it.
forever. But the most important thing that I know, right, from the forensic perspective, as Des has brought me in on a number of cases, is do not engage a forensic consultant without engaging it through counsel. So that's just, I think, to me, the number one. Okay, I just wanted to give that a minute to sit. Why is there a giant shrimp on your screen? Well, because I don't know if you spend time on Twitter, but this was also brought through in other news sources, but there was a shrimp tails issue, right? We wanted to think about what recent PR crisis could we talk about to sort of, you know, just sort of give an example of what types of things you probably can't really prepare for, right? I don't think anyone is, no matter what, we've never seen a crisis plan that says shrimp tails. But Cinnamon Toast Crunch was in the news recently, or you know, General Mills, for a man, and I'm being a little vague here, but someone found shrimp tails in their cereal box, right? So, you know, if you don't like shrimp, this is a tough slide to look at, but imagine shrimp crusted in cinnamon and sugar, or sorry, just the tails, so not the whole shrimp. So this is not, you know, this is not a good situation. And why are we talking about this? Well, it went completely viral, much like the video that Desiree was talking about on social media. The individual who found the shrimp tails was or is married or to someone who is well known, and he's well known. And you know, the thing to think about is, and this is why Des and I will always stress, you should have your PR and legal teams in constant communications. And for something like this, if all of a sudden you're listening to social media and you realize, oh my goodness, there's a big crisis that's happening, right? You know, someone claims that they found whatever, plastic rice, shrimp tails, you know, chemicals, who knows? That is a time to have both your PR, marketing, communications, and legal in the same room for a few reasons. One is, as Artush said, right, anything you say can and will be used against you, and that's just a good thing to think about it, right? It's sort of quirky and silly, but really it's true, because if you just pop something out on social media without thinking about it, that could be a very bad move. And all of this to say that the response to, you know, from the company here sort of helped fuel the fire a little bit. And, you know, we don't have insight into this. You know, all we can say is, again, I think, be mindful of who is responding to inquiries on social media. If there is, there should be a policy in place for escalated events. So think about, you know, certainly training your employees, but thinking about how big is this problem, right? Your employees who are monitoring social, you know, or a firm that you've engaged to do that needs to understand what would be like a small problem, what would be a big problem, and what's sort of in between. And there needs to be a different process to make sure that, you know, this isn't just a situation where somebody was unhappy with the, you know, the number of almonds in their cereal, right? This isn't that type of an issue. This is, you know, much bigger. And so a response that is insensitive to an employee, to a customer rather, or could be perceived to be belittling them or combative, you know, that's not the position to take. The customer is always right. I mean, they aren't, right? But you want to sort of take that position in terms of communications. And also, I think it's really, really important to use that opportunity, even though it's a negative situation, to try and gain control of the narrative, whether it's a cereal company or a religious organization or you know, a big public company or an online retailer, whatever company we're talking about. Try to think about using this to your advantage. Stay true to the company's mission and use that opportunity to show the public that you take things seriously, that you treat customers with respect and care, that they're so important to you. And that is something that we recommend in all situations, but it's very easy to mess up. The other thing that I'll say here, just because I think it's funny, right? I spend way too much time on social media, particularly Twitter, but other companies use this as an opportunity to post on social media, right? So there were a couple of companies, also food companies, that posted very cheeky responses that got almost enough or as much traction as the original posts. So, we've seen a lot of companies sort of take on a very, very different personas online. They're joking, they're being silly, whatever that might be. If that is your company and that works, think about that and keep your ear to the ground on what's happening generally in your industry or to competitors, and make sure that you, use those opportunities to further your brand. So I'm going to move on. I don't want to be mindful of time unless you have anything to say about shrimp. Okay, we're going to move on. So let's do a quick poll, and I'll ask that the poll be pulled up. Take a minute, if you will, to answer. We can't vote, but does your company have a crisis response plan? Okay, really happy to see this. So for one, that's wonderful. If your company, if you answered no, it's definitely, especially as new in-house counsel, it's something for you to think about and potentially raise within your company as a great opportunity for you to take ownership of a project. Just something that I would encourage, and I know Desiree would agree. For those of you who answered yes, the next poll question, do you know, okay, may have a crisis response plan, but do you know what's in it? Have you read it? Are you trained on it? Do you know who to call when something happens, aside from Ghostbusters? Am I dating myself? I probably am. Okay, don't do that. No, okay. Again, a really, really good opportunity. Crisis plans are not static. They are designed to change over time. We recommend annual review of the program at least, and it has to change, right? I mean, you can have different social media platforms born, or the company changes, you acquire a new business line. A lot can happen in a year, as we've seen over the pandemic. So again, I think this is a great opportunity for new in-house counsel to really grab something and take ownership of it.
In the last 7 minutes, we're going to give you some tangible takeaways for your practice and as your contributions to your companies. Also, just a reminder that if you do have a question for us, just go ahead and send that along in the chat, and we'll get to it as we go through the takeaways.
We alluded to this a few times, but number one is proactively monitor. However you do that, however is meaningful to you. This is something we do for multiple clients every day, but go out there and figure out the best way and most cost-efficient way for you to keep your ear to the ground. Not just on your own business, but maybe key employees, management, C-suite, on the industry. You want to know what's going on, and be mindful of what forum people are talking about on. So think about if your company is on the verge of bankruptcy, I'm sorry, but also, for bankruptcy and restructuring type conversations, those are often taking place on forums, right? So if you're not thinking about that, then you may not sort of look in the right places. So definitely monitor proactively.
One of the biggest mistakes that we see is an overreaction. So assuming that a crisis is going to take the company down, and then, an hour later that tweet has gone by the wayside and no one has seen it. So part of this is something Elisa said earlier, which is, think about what your crises are in advance, right? If you're a cereal company, shrimp tails in the box is probably a major crisis. Or if you can't approximate that, specifically, like foreign objects in our food would be a major crisis. For a cereal company, I don't know, some other thing won't be a crisis, right? You have to determine, as it concerns your company, your industry, the circumstances that your company's in at the time, what is a crisis and what isn't, and then react accordingly.
The next tip or takeaway is really, really important and often forgotten. I think, and this depends on the company setup, right? But a lot of times the PR team, internally or even externally will say, no, we got this. This is PR, this is marketing. Like, we're fine, we don't need you. Well, they do, right? They definitely need you. And one thing to think about is whether you can make conversations, right, or memos or strategies privileged, right, by your presence. So if legal becomes involved and is in the room where it happens, right, from the get-go, that is very much a legal strategy analysis, right? How are we going to proceed with this crisis in a way that manages our legal risk going forward? So if they try to push you out of the room, try to push back, and remember, you don't want those internal memos talking about, well, this is stupid, so we shouldn't respond to it, or it's not a big deal, right? Coming out after the fact when you realize there's a class action lawsuit against the company. So preservation is absolutely critical. And this is something that is very important and can make all the difference in a case. If we actually get to court, we need to have tangible evidence that we can submit to a court. And social media evidence, again, another program that we'd be happy to present, but not today in 3 minutes. Think about how you preserve, think about how you train your employees to escalate and preserve information, because information online is not there forever. Much of it is, and of course, the information we don't want online, you can't take off, or it's hard to get off, and the information we want to keep often disappears quickly. But the better trained your staff is to do that, the better position you'll be in going forward. And we have people and tools to preserve forensically so that it would be admissible in court. But again, not something you're thinking of as shrimp tails happens, but something that you should be thinking about.
We have a question in the chat, so let me jump to that quickly, and then we'll land on this. So what is the average shelf life of a sudden single negative PR event these days? That is a great question, and I don't want to give you false comfort, but I will tell you from our wide experience in this area, it is not very long if it's handled correctly. When it is not handled correctly, that fallout is what lasts. The event itself, no one cares. I can tell you this, I looked a CEO in the face and over a major incident, and I said to him, no one cares. And he looked at me like, what? Like, it was a really negative event, but he also wanted people to care. He was sort of torn, like, but aren't I important? There's too much news, there's too much information. If the response is handled correctly, if the company moves on, if you can work closely with PR so that they launch campaigns that put the company in a positive light, you will get through it. But a negative response or anything that perpetuates the incident is going to just exponentially extend the time out. So really great question. Okay, and then finally, this is why we're all here, right? To assess the available legal remedies. What can you do from a legal standpoint to remove content, to ensure that a threat actor is no longer harassing an employee at your company? Is there a cease and desist letter? Can we file a lawsuit? Can we do a DMCA takedown on a platform, right? So think, and oftentimes the response to a digital crisis is multi-factor and creative. So you have to think a little bit about, okay, we're going to sue this woman on the rights because it's viral and it's false, but also, oh, we have an infringement, so we're going to do a takedown on the platform, right? Just to give one example. Think about a multi-factor, multifaceted legal response that involves moving quickly and also maybe a long-term strategy.
Absolutely. So if anyone has any additional questions, we're happy to take them now. We don't have much time, sorry about that. But also you can email us or tweet at us or reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk about any specific questions that you have. And I have to say thank you so much to the ACC for this opportunity. It's so great to be able to present to you and talk about something that is something we're so passionate about, the two of us. So thank you.
And thanks to Artush too for setting this all up. We're so grateful.
Thank you, Artush.